Hi everyone, it's John, me. There we go. Welcome back to my channel. I wanted to catch up on book reviews, and I'm going to talk about one more book I have read in the past couple of months. Again, looking for a little bit of a reprieve from some of the heavier history books that I have been reading all year long. This is a book I wasn't really expecting much out of, but I'll talk about my impressions of it once I did read it in a bit. This is Cathedral by Raymond Carver. Came out in 1983, exactly 40 years ago. So this is mostly a book for, mostly review, for people who are completely new to Raymond Carver's writing. I think if you have read much of his writing, certainly if you've read the two stories that I want to talk about most in this review, it might be less useful. So if you're familiar with Carver or with Cathedral, which I just showed you in particular, it will be less interesting because you'll know a lot of the stuff I'm already talking about. So the shape and timbre of his writing is what is new to me as someone who reads mostly more classic, quote-unquote, literary fiction, and wasn't quite what I was expecting, even though I sort of knew a little bit about him, that he sort of had a noirish feel, sort of harkens back to, 30s, 40s, 50s writing, dark, grim, that sort of thing. But I didn't really know what to expect, and that's why I want to take a couple of minutes to share what I think. So I think you could call Carver sort of a poet for the downtrodden everyman sort of figure. His writing is very plain, very unadorned, maybe even simplistic, or certainly simple, maybe not simplistic. His characters are not important people with vaunted positions in society. They read very often like they've stumbled out of somewhere in the middle of post-industrial America, trying to make their way through life as best they can, as many of us do, living what many people might call failed lives, and existing in relationships that often hang by a string. They are slow to find their words, and they're even slower to use them. And if this sounds depressing, you're not wholly wrong. This whole aesthetic might, at least superficially, seem like it could produce limited emotional effects. It's easy to spin sadness, ennui, and alienation out of this kind of writing, and Carver does all of those with ease. Of course, a collection like this will pull reviewers in different directions regarding the stories which have a stronger or weaker appeal, and some are going to inevitably be more or less memorable. And 10 of the 12 stories that are presented here fall into the less than impressive camp for me. By the way, this is a collection of a dozen short stories. And 10 of them I thought don't really stick with me. But I'm willing to certainly grant, especially with short stories, that the state of mind that you're in when you approach these short stories is very much a function of what you take away from the story long term. But keeping that in mind, I think it also takes true talent to pull off the other stuff that Carver accomplishes here, which is creating stories in which his characters are drawn together in really unpredictable circumstances to experience the sheer humanity of one another. And that's what I loved. This is what Carver achieves in two of his stories the two stories I really want to talk about in this review. One of which is called A Small Good Thing, which is an extended version of his earlier story, The Bath, which was originally published in his previous collection before this, called What We Talk About When We Talk About Love. And the other story I want to talk about is Cathedral, the title story, which is also the last story in the collection. A Small Good Thing is about a boy named Scotty. Now, I may or may not give away more details than you want to hear about the story. So, if you don't want to hear any details, let me just leave it here and you can walk away from the review. I highly, highly suggest that you go read A Small Good Thing and Cathedral. They are extremely, extremely, very much worth your time. And for other people who don't mind having a few plot points maybe discussed before you go read it, stick around and I'll tell you more about the stories themselves. So, A Small Good Thing is about a young boy named Scotty who is celebrating his birthday, and his mother orders a cake for him over the phone, and on the day she plans to pick it up, Scotty is hit by a car, and he's rushed to the hospital where he precariously clings to his life for several days. And while the doctor promises that children with Scotty's condition usually improve, a series of misinterpreted phone calls that are taken to be practical jokes when they're really just the baker trying to inform Scotty's parents that his cake is ready take place. Scotty's parents storm into the bakery with plans to unleash their anger on the baker and tell him that, how dare you prank call us during this horrible time in our life. But really, it's one of the true magical moments in short stories, in fiction, when you can take this situation, this sort of tension that has arisen because people have misunderstood what happened, because some people are living in very, very strained, emotionally trying circumstances, but are still able somehow to show a deep sympathy and care for one another. What at first seems like it's going to be a violent climax to the story ends up being a soothing, and deeply satisfying denouement instead. It's not exactly a plot twist that makes the end so fascinating, but rather the very real connection that Scotty's parents are able to form with the baker, who they actually meet up with in person at the end of the story, despite there being, like I said, such drastic misunderstandings brought on by Scotty's lingering condition in the hospital and what they perceive to be, at first, these antagonistic prank phone calls. It is such a subtle, profound, gorgeous human ending that, like I said, I just highly, highly recommend you go out and read the story. I don't know if these stories are in the common domain yet. They're 40 years old. I don't know where the cutoff point is, but I wanted to tell you about the other story that I was just wrapped up with as well before I wrap up the review. The other really great one is Cathedral, the last story in the collection. It is about a blind man named Robert who comes to stay with the narrator who's telling the story and his wife. The narrator clearly has a prejudiced view of what blind people can do, who they are, who they can be, what they can become, and possibly a prejudiced, narrow view of maybe disabilities as a whole, maybe other people from other backgrounds, other kinds of people. the narrator is transformed in this story in a fascinating way that exposes his vulnerabilities and his again, this deep humanity that comes through in the story. It's just incredible. Uh, he feels uncomfortable with with Robert visiting them in their house, and he makes some faux pas along the way when he comes over, like thinking that blind people, for whatever reason, can never wear a full beard. Know where that came from, but it's something he says in the story. And during Robert's visit, the narrator's prejudices are slowly picked at and slowly questioned through the actions that take place in the story. After the narrator's wife has gone to bed, the narrator and Robert decide to watch a television program about cathedrals, during which the narrator asks Robert if he knows what a cathedral is, assuming that, he may have been blind from birth and have never seen one. And Robert says that he's not religious and doesn't really understand or appreciate what a cathedral might be. Then it's one of those moments again, like we saw in A Small Good Thing, where a predictable, mundane ending that you're maybe expecting is subverted and replaced by another that shows remarkable compassion, understanding, and human connection. The narrator picks up a pen and a piece of paper. He holds his hand over Robert's hand, and he gently begins to sketch a drawing of a cathedral. Robert tells him to close his eyes and keep drawing so he can sort of try to envision what it's like. When Robert tells him to open his eyes and see what he's drawn, the narrator leaves his eyes closed, perhaps in a sign of apathy or carelessness. I like to read it as him being sort of reveling in a suspended moment of gratitude and this intimate connection that he's made that has produced a profound change in him. And there, the story ends. You have no idea what happens to the narrator afterward. I like to think that this one moment triggers in him something about the possibility of others to live, envision, care, to be humane, and to be human to each other. But in short, to be sort of a little bit cheesy about the story, it's about how a blind man teaches a sighted man to see. It's incredible, and it might be one of the best short stories I've ever read in my life. For people reading this on Goodreads, I don't always necessarily say in my filmed reviews what I give on Goodreads. I always give a score reading on Goodreads, though they mean such divergent things to people. So I gave this book a 3, but it was because the 3 is because I'm rating the collection as a whole. Since 10 of the 12 stories I found to be relatively flat and bland for me, I couldn't justify giving the entire collection anything more than 3 stars, since nearly all of them were forgettable. But to be honest, the way I reacted to those 2 makes me want to go back and read the other 10 and see if I have reread the other 10 and see if I have a different impression. If I could rate A Small Good Thing and Cathedral individually, separately from the other stories, I would give them both 5 stars, 6 if I could. They are, I think, monumentally important stories. Touching, brilliant, full of a kind of empathy and care that I wasn't expecting. These 2 stories alone have made me maybe want to seek out more of Carver's work, and they're alone worth the price of the book should you ever happen across it sometime at a library book sale or something like that. So the way I would sum up my review of these two stories from the whole collection would be please, please, please read A Small Good Thing and Cathedral, because I think they have the potential to make you a better person. And those are pretty high words of praise. So here is my few words about Cathedral, especially my two favorite stories from it by Raymond Carver. I will see you next time.